Hello and welcome to Threads of Fate. I am your host, Kira Ryberg, and today we are joined by the wonderful Maeg Keane, an astrologer, an herbalist, a writer, and a dear, dear friend of mine. Maeg, welcome to the show.
It's lovely to be here. It's good to
What do
see your
we?
face.
It's always a pleasure, a delight, a joy to see your face and to be chatting with you. And
Mm-hmm.
today we are talking about a subject that both you and I absolutely love, have talked
Mm-hmm.
about at length in the
I,
past,
famously at length.
which is the 11th house.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to kind of go through some of what this house means, both, in the history of astrology, but also to us and our practices and why we find so much meaning and value and fulfillment in this part of the chart. Sneaky, shameless plug to Meg and I's collaboration on the fifth and 11th houses called Finding Fulfillment. But I'm curious, why is this place so special to you? Because it is something that you specialize in. You have a
Mm-hmm.
reading about the 11th house. You're talking about it all the time. So, what about it really gives you that special something for you?
It took me a while, I think, to fully appreciate this house. Like I was like, oh, it's like I don't know why. It's full of really great stuff. But I was doing fifth house work for, I don't know, like a year and a half. And I realized that all of the conversations I wanted to have with people about joy and pleasure and play and creativity kept, as they do, flowing across the way to the other side of the chart, these like interesting relationships between the houses that are across from each other. And that so many people, yeah, like struggle with joy and pleasure and playfulness on their own. I know I do. And their own creative practices and kind of getting in their own way and all the pressures of daily life and da 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 da. But also the pressures of the 11th house finding their way into the fifth of like, what will people think? What will it be like to be seen? Like, if I do share what I make with people, whether it's like classically creative or something else, if I share myself, if I share what I create and make, what will happen next? Like, will no one see it? And that will be
Mhm.
horrible. Will too many people see it and that will be horrible? Will people see it and misunderstand it and I will feel terrible and confused and like, why did I even do this? And then also some of the stressors around joy and pleasure being related to like how we feel in friendship and community, how we feel about sharing with a group generally. Often a lot of those pains come from like friendship wounds
Mm.
too, you know? And so there's just a lot of flow between these two places. And so I started not just offering fifth house readings, but also offering 11th house ones because they felt like they do belong together. And I fell in love with that house because it's where we do well, we talk about this a lot in the workshop and guidebook, but I feel strongly that while there's a lot of joy and pleasure and creativity that can just be a little bit more private, a little bit more personal, more
Mm.
Venusian, there is a Jupiterian version that's like about being in broader connection and how we all need each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, and skipping over that part is skipping over a lot of what makes life possible, let alone meaningful. So,
Yeah. And I think too, that connection between, any houses that oppose each other so intimately connected and weird mirrors of each other. And
mhm.
so much of what we talk about is like, is this a fifth house thing? Is this an 11th house thing? Oh, wait, actually, it's both question
Yeah.
mark. And when you're exploring the 11th house, I feel like there's so many ways in which it reflects back a lot of the themes of the fifth house. But at the same time, it does take kind of this broader scope, right? Because Venus, who finds her joy in the fifth house, it's so intimate, and then you get up into Jupiter's joy in the 11th house, which means it's Jupiter's favorite part of the chart to be in. You're just completely doused in all of these different Jupiter significations, but it extends beyond a certain degree of intimacy that we find in the fifth, which can be really exciting and awe-inspiring and also really terrifying and vulnerable and hard, especially if that part of the chart is more tender and more sensitive for you because you have malefics ruling that house or in that house or something about, the condition of the planet who's in charge of that part of the chart. And so I think that there's something about going into that Jupiter stuff where it's like, this is where a lot of happiness lives, or at least is where on a baseline we're supposed to experience a lot of happiness. And how does that differ from the joy that we find in the fifth, but also how do they inform one another? And so, yeah, to me, it's, so much of this house is just, it sits with Jupiter and Jupiter's relationship with Venus. And I'm curious if you're going to describe Jupiter as a character, perhaps, how would you talk about Jupiter?
Jupiter, I have I have a complicated relationship with Jupiter actually. Like just personally, I've probably written about Jupiter more than any other planet because I write about the things I'm tussling with, and I was like, Jupiter's my benefic of sect. Like I should love this guy. Like there's what's not to love. And I feel like Jupiter can be, if you don't like change and you like control,
Mm,
can be really overwhelming because there is this like push to grow. And while it's easy to kind of be talking about how all the planets are teachers and they all like are, pushing us or making it, no one does it quite like Jupiter does in
for
terms
sure.
of like turning the dial up. I always feel like Jupiter is um the person telling you to take the jump and you're like, I don't have wings, man. I'm gonna fall. And he's like, you're fine. You can do it. Like, and I'm just like, I can't tell if you're like the enabling friend or are you are actually like a guardian spirit. Like I can't, it
Both
feels
and.
both and why not both? Um, and I also, I think people are right to kind of contrast Saturn and Jupiter to each other. And I often think of Saturn as like risk management and kind of like plan for what's going to go wrong. Like, let me list all the ways this is going to go poorly so that you can
Hmm.
prepare. And Jupiter is this little whisper being like, yeah, but what if it goes great?
Hmm.
What if it goes incredible? And that can be really inspiring, but it can also strike fear in people in a surprising way because it actually like success and opportunity and more visibility or more can feel like more pressure or like confronting the limits you've put on yourself too. Um,
Yeah.
and like the ability to receive is something that I think both Venus and Jupiter in different ways like put pressure on us around, like and kind of force us to be like, oh wow, yeah, like subjectively good things are happening, but I feel like, can I hold it all? Can I like live up to what is showing up for me? um and so Jupiter as a character for me is encouraging, ideally is helping you grow in a way that's ultimately more stabilizing in the end.
Hmm.
But the process, like the growing pains, the stretching, the building capacity stuff, can be uncomfortable on the way, but it's for exciting, good opportunities and possibilities for you. So like that's like the just like there's discomfort even though it's benefic, but it's still
Yeah.
benefic,
Yeah.
how do you tend to talk about Jupiter?
I mean, I think I don't always jump straight to archetypes, but I feel like with Jupiter, I do for some reason.
Mm,
Like to me, Jupiter, it's so easy to be like, this is the sage archetype.
mm-hmm,
Jupiter holds a lot of wisdom. And I think that's part of why that process that you're describing can feel really uncomfortable because it's almost like, well, there's this wise force that is telling me it's all going to be okay. But my experience hasn't necessarily led me to believe that that's the case.
mm-hmm,
Or for someone who has a really domiciled Jupiter, that might be their default. Is like, oh no, actually, I tend to kind of take risks and it does work out. And I am kind of lucky in that way. But most people in the world don't have a dignified Jupiter, right? So their experience of that is very different. And I think when I talk about Jupiter, it's either kind of talking about how it's related to this transfer of wisdom and knowledge in a way that's slightly different to Mercury's, but also that Jupiter is beneficence. Jupiter does want the best for you most of the time, right? Chart dependent, but all things being equal. Jupiter does want to support you, and that support can feel uncomfortable if you're not used to support. And that's where I think that thing you're talking about of like the growing pains is the way that I describe it is it's like when you're blowing up a balloon, but you're blowing it up not like blowing into it yourself, but with a machine, and it's getting
Mhm.
bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're like, is it going to pop? Is it going to
Yeah.
pop? Oh my
Oh, that's such
God.
a good analogy. Hmm.
And it's like with,
If you've never seen a big balloon before, you're like, surely it's going to pop.
yeah,
Like, it can't possibly. You're like used to this like little guy.
like surely it can't hold all of
Hmm.
this air, and it just keeps going and it keeps kind of testing your idea of what is possible. And so Jupiter kind of asks you to trust fall with the universe a lot of the time, or to take a leap of faith. And I think that leap of faith, like you were saying, it can be kind of difficult when you're standing at the edge of a cliff and you don't have wings and someone's pushing you off of it. And for me, when I think of Jupiter, I think of the fact that there's oftentimes like a mattress or something that's really, like when people are doing like stunt work and
Yes.
there's like this
Yes.
huge thing that catches them that you can't see off camera. Like to me, Jupiter is that thing that catches you, but you have to fly through the air at first. And that can be exhilarating and exciting and terrifying all at once. And I think when we think about the 11th house, which is related to friendship, which is related to being in community with other people, sharing your work with the world, it kind of feels like that a lot of the time. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
this trust fall of, oh my God, if I put myself out there with this person, are they going to screw me over? Are they going to stab me in the back? Or is this friendship not going to last? Which can be a whole different thing, right? The seasonality of relationships. And then if I share my work with the world, what's going to happen? And are there going to be people there to even receive it or not? And how does that get received when it's no longer of me? And so I think of Jupiter as kind of being a guardian angel in a lot of ways that wants to help you grow and wants to help you learn, but also does it through experience, not through books, right? Like I
Hmm.
think that's kind of the qualifying difference between Mercury's learning and Jupiter's learning is Jupiter wants you to go have the experience and learn what you can from doing the thing versus Mercury is like, I don't know, listen to a podcast or take a course or see what happens like from that kind of perspective. But Jupiter's the experiential wisdom. Mercury is like listening to this podcast. This is a mercurial thing. But when you go out and you read a chart, you're doing a Jupiter thing. You're applying the knowledge and then learning and testing and doing this kind of trial thing that can only be experienced by practice, which I kind of feel like is like it's the going on the adventure kind of part of things. And I think Jupiter kind of makes you go on some type of quest, some type of journey, some type of adventure. And not all quests are created equal and not all feel as fun as others.
Yeah. Yeah. You talking about like the difference between more like gathering the data of Mercury and the going out and experiencing it of Jupiter makes me think about um Jupiter's connection to like culture making and like being out in the community. Like you can't you there is like I think about to go back to like the fifth house, 11th house difference. Like it's we we're all making the culture what it is all the time by participating in it, even though there are like obviously power structures that have more impact than we might like them to have. But like the way you do that is by going and putting cultural objects in the world and engaging with people, and like the way you treat people changes the culture of a to different rippling layers of various circles of community.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Jupiter thing. Like the going out, you can't just like be holding all the stuff in your own little space. You have to go out and be like amongst.
Yeah.
And the 11th house is the most populated house in the chart. It is the crowd. I think what used to really confuse me about the 11th house is the fact that such different circles of intimacy are described by it. Like the fact that
Mm-hmm.
like friends, community, your audience, like these are very different levels of closeness with people.
Yeah.
And yet all of them are found in the 11th. But I think it's that like group dynamic component. It's not about the size of the group, it's just the fact that you're negotiating things that are more interwoven and complex than the one-on-one relationships of the seventh house.
Yeah.
And I think that like that is part of going forth, like doing like going to an astrology conference or even like giving live readings in a market is a way
Mm-hmm.
more 11th house experience than sitting alone learning astrology or even giving like a one-on-one consult. There's something about it that feels more like you're participating in something that is alive, like you're one limb in a big body of things that are happening. And that also feels like that Jupiter, I'm me, but I'm also part of more than me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think to me that ties into the idea of practiced wisdom versus yeah, more of that I'm constantly like taking classes and reading books, and which is also delicious. Like we're both Mercury
Oh,
people,
yeah.
but like it's Jupiter kind of forces, and I think that's also an uncomfortable thing too. It's more vulnerable to be pushed out into the world
Oh, totally.
than to just stay in your little like library, studio,
Mm-hmm.
bedroom world of learning by yourself.
Yeah. And it's making me think too about how just Jupiter is further away, right? It's not a personal planet. And
Mm-hmm.
so we get something kind of impersonal, which sounds weird when you describe Jupiter that way, because I don't think that when we think about what impersonal means, we don't think of something like or somebody like Jupiter. But at the same time, there is that kind of degree of separation that I think lives in the 11th house, right? Like your audience or even a friend group, you have various degrees of intimacy with different people in that group, right? You might be best friends with one person, and then the other person is a coworker of the friend, and you kind of know them, but you all go out together. And there's kind of this, there's a level of separation, I think, that we can find in the 11th house because it is inherently less personal versus maybe like the friendships we find in the third or the friendships that we find in the 11th, which feel a little bit more tight knit. For the third house, I think Valen says it's people who are like your kin.
Mm-hmm.
It's like those friends you're like, she's like my sister. Like that's a third house person, right? Versus the 11th house is like all of the people at the astrology conference that you maybe talk to on a really regular basis and really enjoy, but you don't have that same level of like deep, deep intimacy. But there is a like a camaraderie there. And I think
A
camaraderie
really
is a
good word.
really good 11th house descriptor.
Mm-hmm.
It's like someone that you share something in common with, right? Like your book club is an 11th house thing because you are all coming together to read the same book and then discuss it, right? That doesn't mean you're besties, but that does
Yeah,
mean that there's like a shared interest or a shared belief system, right? Something that is a bridge point for you and another person to be like, hey, I get you because of
mm-hmm.
this thing that we have in common. And I think that that's why a lot of times friendship can be found in a lot of different parts of the chart because it's speaking to different types of friendships.
Yeah,
And I also think at the same time, in a really weird vein, friendships TM is an 11th house thing. Like if you're just wanting to know how does friendship as a
yeah,
topic go for you, you would go to the 11th, I think more often than not. But that doesn't mean that it's the only place you can find as a descriptor of those relationships, if that makes sense.
totally. It's like you would go to the 11th house to understand friendship in general, or like, what do friendships kind of feel like for you? What are your experiences in friendship? The heartache, the joy, all of it. And then if you were like, but what about me and this friend though? And it's like, well, tell me more. If we're in like a session, it's like, tell me more about the like the nature of that friendship. Like, how does this person slot into your life? How do they feel to you? Like, what is this? How often are you talking? When you do talk, like what kind of topics do you talk about? Because some friendships like don't go as deep,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really fun and enjoyable, and they you wouldn't want to lose them. But then there's the friendships that are like, this person knows everything about me.
Yeah.
Like I there's no corner of me that I don't share with this person. You can see this curtain because a cat wants to leave. Hold on one second. Hey, buddy.
We love when animals join the podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I think it also shows how, the aspects between the 11th and the third or the seventh is like these are pathways for more intimate connections to form, right? Like someone might
Totally.
start out as an 11th house person and then become a third house person because you talk to them all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a deeper level of intimacy that forms, and they could become a seventh house person. And there's, I just wrote and released a whole guidebook on aspects between houses that talks about this, but I really do think it gets to the heart of that thing of like, well, where is friendship in the chart? And it's like, well, it's in all of them. And that's because
Mm-hmm.
it leads into all of them through that trine, right? It's like this flowing, harmonious relationship that removes these blockages. It's like, well, to be able to get deep with someone, you kind of have to start on a less personal level. You have to start in the 11th house. And the 11th house is kind of like a really fertile ground for a relationship to form. And I think that's Jupiter at its core, right? It is a connective, generative force, right? It's a benefic, it is supportive of life, and so it's like, well, what's supportive of life is like being in community with other people, having relationships with other people is supportive to us. And you can get into why we think of the 11th house as being more positive, right? Because if you're reading any kind of ancient text, they often do this really kind of terrible thing of ranking the houses in order of best to worst. And the 11th house tends to fall on one side of that spectrum where it is a little bit more beneficial. And part of the reason for that is because Jupiter's joy, as we've been discussing, but also because it's in a sextile to the ascendant, right? To that first house of self and health and, personhood. And so it's like, well, sextiles are of the nature of Venus. They're a little bit more positive, right? And, this is where knowing aspects, for example, is like, it will help every single
Oh my
element
God.
of your practice.
Mhm.
But thinking about these relationships between the two of them, right, is like that sextile from the 11th to the first. It shows that all of those things that we find in the 11th house are often very supportive to us on a baseline level: friendship,
Yeah.
community, your dreams, right? Like Jupiter
Hmm.
is also the dreamer. And we talk a lot personally about dreams and how Jupiter is a little bit more delusional
I was
in a
gonna
good
say,
way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's like there. I've seen. I think it's probably because of all the work United for finding fulfillment, but my Instagram algorithm really likes showing me videos of people encouraging people to be delusional, um, and it's like this like embrace of yeah, just decide it's possible and then go try it, And I think there's like a obviously you can go too far with this, and there are like domiciled or I think probably especially domiciled Jupiters that can tend toward like where is the edge of
Yeah.
the delusion or the like standard of what I think is possible for my life and what I think should be possible for my life, like when the good thing gets too good, when the sugar sticks to your teeth, that kind of thing that we talk about. um but I think that there's like a little bit of delusion in a world that feels so often like it's just very easy, especially right now, to feel like nothing's possible. And so having that like infusion of almost like slight overcorrection, you'll still land, most of us will still land somewhere that's like pretty reasonable. And like I think life's extremely short. Like we need Jupiter to push us off that cliff, knowing that there's a mattress underneath. And we don't know there's a mattress underneath, but Jupiter does. And I think that a little bit of um slight delusion, fantasy, imagination, hope, dream, aspiration is good medicine for all the ways that perfectionism, cynicism, um, grief, like are so present. And like the value of like earnestness and sincerity also feels like a Jupiter value as well. And if you can't imagine what things could be, it'll be much harder to create them. And so there's like wanting hope to have some teeth and some muscle attached to
Mm.
it, but not wanting to get rid of it altogether for the sake of like, I'm seeing things just so clearly and everything's bad. And I
Yeah.
think Jupiter does a good job of that. And that like sextile relationship and the way that the 11th by diurnal motion is on its way up to the 10th is like, we haven't reached the top yet. We haven't like found out what the view from the mountaintop is, but we're on that, we're cresting. We know we're about to see something incredible. In some
Yeah.
ways, that moment is actually sometimes better than actually getting to the top and being like,
Totally.
okay, I saw it. Time to go downhill now. My least favorite part of the hike. But I going downhill is so much harder than going uphill. I don't care what anybody says. That's just like the way my body is built. I'm just like, oh no, why? But that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, that anticipatory moment, or like standing backstage before a performance, like your cues about
The
to,
excitement.
it's so wonderful that like that stirring feeling is very Jupiter and it's very the 11th house. And like the people ideally that you find in the 11th house are the people who are feeling that with you because they're sharing in hopes and dreams alongside you in an ideal world. We can talk about the ways in which it's not always ideal in a moment, but anyway,
Yeah.
you were saying something and then I think I interrupted
No,
with
that's okay. I like love when you go off. It's just wisdom being imparted into my
oh,
soul.
stop.
No, I mean, I think it's so true. Like a lot of what you're saying, right, is the positivity factor too, is it can be overdone. It can be too much. You know, we all
Mm-hmm.
know that toxic positivity
Mm-hmm.
is not always helpful. And also, but also without any level of positivity, life is just bleak and depressing. And a lot of times you do kind of need that person who is an embodiment of Jupiter to be like, no, actually, even though everything is really terrible and awful, we're going to find a way out of this because
Yeah.
those are the people that make a change. Those are the people that
Yeah.
make a difference, right? Which also just leads us to the fact that the 11th house is where we often find activism. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's where we find protests. It's because people are dreaming of a better world, dreaming of a different type of relating and being together and possibility for all types of people that we get that, you know, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's not possible if you're only doing the Saturn thing of like, well, everything sucks and is miserable and is hopeless. So let's just keep doing the stuff that's miserable and hopeless, right? Because Saturn's really good at pushing through without hope. You know, Saturn's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, let's just keep going. And
Yeah.
Saturn has many virtues. I am a Saturnian through and through. I'm not trying to completely trash on Saturn right
We
now.
would never trash on Saturn. It would
Never.
because we love and also because it's just so dangerous.
Yeah, no, I mean, Saturn, don't smite me, but we do need that Jupiter hope that something can change, that there can be a different type of being in the world, you know, for all of us. And it makes me think about how Valens in like the second century gave emancipated slaves to the 11th house, right? And that there is this quality of Jupiter and liberation, right?
Yes.
Where Saturn binds, Jupiter liberates. And sometimes liberation can be really scary. Like you get a chain removed and you're like, okay, what now? You know, like where do I go from here? But it's also the start of that possibility, which is kind of like that exciting anticipatory energy that you were describing, which can take so many different shapes and forms depending on a situation, right? It can be literally feeling like you just got out of a really terrible relationship and for the first time you're able to like dream of a different life for yourself. It can be the anticipation of waiting for your favorite artist to get on stage and the whole crowd is kind of like holding their breath waiting for the opening moment, right? There's really profound ways that this can show up that are some easier than others, but that's it all comes back to that Jupiter quality at the end of the day. And I think that's one of the threads that connects so many of the different significations of the 11th house together, right? Which like Valence is like its friends and its hopes and its gifts and its children, which I could go on a whole
Yeah.
rant about how the 11th house is also
Would you?
children.
I think you should. I think you should actually, because it is confusing to read the older authors talk about how much the 11th is also about children, which is the oldest signification of the fifth house. And it's like, excuse me, pause. I have a question. And I know your whole thing about this, and I agree. So I think you should go on a tangent about it, actually.
All right, since I've been given permission,
Mm-hmm.
since you've
Mm-hmm.
liberated me from this Eternian idea that nobody actually wants to hear me go on that tangent, I will let my Jupiter take over.
Good.
Um, so yeah, the thing about the 11th house also representing children, and you'll find this in different authors throughout the tradition, is that they kind of say that, well, you hope for a child. So the 11th house is either the fulfillment of that hope or the hope itself, right? Like, especially when we're not in modern times where we have the ability to kind of go to the doctor, find out what's happening, test sperm, test our fertility, right? We can get clarity that just did not exist for a very long time in terms of like, well, I'm trying and I'm trying and I'm trying and I'm just not having, you know, luck with this, which is also a Jupiter Venus thing, like kind of, right? Like I'm not, I didn't draw that lot in life or what have you. And I think that Jupiter is, it's the hope for a child in that way. Jupiter is also you read any type of myth, impregnating everybody all of the time, everywhere,
Super
with
famous for this.
or
Yep.
without consent, and so there is this kind of quality there of the wish for the child, but then I think there is also this really interesting relationship with the fifth house being the child themselves, and the 11th house being that child gaining agency, and this differentiation between what you've created in the fifth house and the ways in which you can kind of feel this Venusian possessiveness and intimacy with, and this can be a child very literally, or a project or anything. And then that thing of Jupiter, liberation. Okay, this actually doesn't, like, a child doesn't belong to you, right? They are their own being, and they are going to go out in the world and they're going to make mistakes and they're going to fuck shit up. And it's going to be so terrifying. And that's also the experience that they have to gain to become a human in the world who, with agency, who makes choices for themselves. And I see the 11th house show up so much when children are gaining agency. And it can show up. I had a client recently who had a bunch of 11th house stuff in their solar return chart or something like this. And we were talking about the relationship with their child. And they were kind of saying, yeah, like my kid they're at this age now where they're still in the house, but like they have their friends and they're doing their own thing. And they don't really want mom and dad around all the time. And it was like this 11th house signification of the kid kind of gaining more agency. I see it all the time when kids go off to college and you kind of have like the empty nest situation. And so I think there is this way in which the 11th house is the hope and the wish for a child. It is the communities that form around a child and the friendships, right? Meg, you brought this to my attention when we were doing Finding Fulfillment. I think you got it from Kelly Surtees, that children were also a way that we made allies, which is
Yeah.
another 11th house thing, right? Like you marry your child off in hopes that you and that family will then, be allies together. And in royal families, obviously, this is a very literal kind of easy thing to see, but it's also, yeah, that kid going out into the world. And so there are many ways in which the 11th house speaks to children and the lives that are built around children, whether it's the hope for one or the actuality of having one. And so it's so easy with astrology to want it to be cut and dry. And Meg and I talk about this all the time as Mercurials, where we're like, it's a mixed bag. Everything is both and. But the 11th house can be one of those where you see children, you're like, no, that's just a fifth house thing. I'm not going to look at it there. But if you don't, you're missing out on this whole other area, the chart that does speak to children and speaks to almost their experience and their individuation and their Jupiter going out into the world and liberating themselves from the family unit in some ways. And yeah, there's many different threads of where we find children in the 11th. And as someone who's become a mom recently, I really like to find the ways in which children show up in the chart that we're not always anticipating, because I think it's so easy to just go fifth house. But any parent knows, like, children kind of find their way into every nook and cranny of your life. And so they're going to show up in that context in astrology as well. And the 11th house is one of the ways in which they do that, one of the places in which they do that.
So glad you talked about all of that, because it also, I think, mirrors nicely what we were talking about with like friendship, not just being in the 11th house. Like it depends on it. It's like, yes, it's like it's a mixed bag. It's both. And we also talk about how if you take that too far, it's like everything means everything, and then astrology doesn't mean anything. So like,
Yeah.
I think it's like getting deeper with the thing you want to know about so that you can more easily locate it in the chart versus having this like big banner topic that you kind of have to go hunting for it everywhere. But if you can get a little deeper on the like what you really want to know about, you still want to look at multiple places, but that's the specificity comes at least as much from the question you're asking as your analysis of the chart itself.
100%. Everything is
And
context, like context dependent.
totally.
And
I mean, it's a divinatory system, so the question is as important as the answer.
we love that.
I was
100%.
also thinking about just the fact that like I don't do, even though I'm a fifth house specialist, I don't do fertility stuff. It's not, it's like that's like a branch of astrology that's very specific and I've never studied it. But I know enough to be dangerous. And I know that Jupiter, like you were saying, is like a very fertile planet. And I think if I had just like guessed, I might have been like, well, maybe for like getting pregnant or not, I would look at like Venus or like the moon or whatever. So I'm not saying you don't, but like Jupiter is the planet that people look at when they're thinking about kids a lot of the time. And so the fact that this is also Jupiter's joy in the 11th, I think also speaks to some of that, like the fertility piece. Not like will you get pregnant or not. I just mean like this link to Jupiter and
Totally.
children, and also children as an idea about wealth. If you think about like the way that children were maybe more in like different times and in different
Hmm.
cultures thought of as like I have more wealth because I have more workers, literally.
Yeah.
Like I have more people, and I also have more, if you are having marriage be a financial proposition, that's also money, but it's also wealth, like abundance. Like I am wealthy because look at all these people that I am
Hmm.
caring for and I have in my life. Like look at what we've like look what my little family has done.
Hmm.
That's a kind of wealth also, and Jupiter is tied to certain kinds of abundance, which is part of why I think Jupiter rejoices in the 11th too. Just as this doesn't necessarily have like a ton of textual evidence, but
Right.
personal gnosis stuff. I think Jupiter is really interested in generosity, and there is some connection between Jupiter and hospitality stuff, even in the ancient texts, and being in community, being in connection, and sharing that, like having a more the merrier approach to being
Hmm.
alive, is a huge 11th house sort of setup. Plus, we have not talked about Agathos Daimon
I
yet.
know. I know.
And the old name for this house was the House of the of Good Spirit, or Agathos Daimon. And this is a spirit. There's lots of ways to talk about this spirit. We could probably do an entire episode just on
We
Agathos
could.
Daimon. But one of the versions of this spirit is as a local to your home
Hmm.
spirit who protects the home, the land, the people in the home, and like what fertility you already have, and like the fertility of the land, but also the fertility of the couple, um, and whatever sort of like wealth in like grain stores or whatever they do have. And so while it's a very community oriented house, the 11th house, Agathos Daimon as a spirit, one of the things that this face of Zeus, face of Jupiter does is sort of like help you have ongoing abundance, which my brain is like ideally that you're sharing.
Yeah. I mean,
And
ideally. But I think
ideally.
Jupiter feels the same in that sense
Mm-hmm,
of generosity, like you were talking
mm-hmm,
about before.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And like this idea of like the circuitry of reciprocity, like the fact that like you give and you get and you give and you get, and that kind of like um that it feels to, like true wealth is being able to be like I have it, so here, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and that's a more securing and fruitful way to live, and it's a very it's one of my hopes anyway for my 11th house hopes for communities is that that's how we operate. So
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that spirit of generosity is what's at the heart of community a lot of the time
mhm.
too. I'm sorry if you're watching the video version and just seeing me get blasted by the sun right now, but that's just what's happening.
You'd think we were talking about the ninth house or something.
Something like that. But yeah, I think that that Jupiter spirit, it's like when you're in community with other people, sometimes you're going to give, sometimes you're going to take, but
Mm-hmm.
that reciprocity is part and parcel of having long sustaining relationships where you're hopefully not giving just to get something in return in the future, but there is this kind of natural, like, I'm there for you, you're there for me, I'll pick you up when you're down and you'll do the same for me. And that makes life bearable and it makes life worth living when you have other people that you're doing it with and doing it for. And I think in the 11th house, you find that relationship of who you're doing life with in a lot of ways. What joy can be found in that and what pain, and how that reciprocity plays out in your life. And one of the significations of the 11th house that I love that comes through in the Alan Darzagar's triplicity lord schema, where he's like dividing up,
Mm-hmm.
the significations to get it more specific, which I talk about in the guidebook if you want the whole technical thing on that, but is basically like the first triplicity Lord will tell you about your friends or something like this. And the second one will tell you about, can you trust those friends? Like
Mm,
what good, what profit comes from the friends? Like our friendship's good for the native, right? And there's something really interesting about that where we think friendship is just like this blanket good, but sometimes friendship is really hard and is really
oh yeah.
painful. And sometimes community doesn't come so easily to some people, not because they're not trying, but because that's part of the way that their natal promise has shaken out. And so it is something about, well, when you're generous with other people, do you get that generosity back all of the time? And you can also find the answer to that in the 11th house. And I think the really beautiful thing about Jupiter is like, yeah, and even if you're not, you're going to keep trying though, because there's something so beautiful about being selfless and about being generous. And I don't think that Jupiter is mm, as self-serving as other some of the other planets can
Hmm.
be, right? And that's not to say that Jupiter can't take that lens sometimes, depending on what signs and what influence are kind of contributing to Jupiter, but it's a little bit more of a we focus than a me focus. And I think that's the 11th house is like, what are we doing? What are we doing tonight, guys? Where are we going? It's about that group orientation, and groups can just bring up all types of stuff for
Oh
people.
yeah. Yeah, they can. Well, and also I think like there's a lot of conversation, at least in my bubble of the internet right now, about community, and how important it is and mutual aid and what we owe each other. And I'm really grateful for those conversations. And I think that the dominant culture in the United States is not community oriented
Mm-mm.
at all. And we often use the word community when we mean industry or when we mean just a general group. There is no like Jupiterian tie though. And I think a lot of people are um looking to learn from folks who've been doing community for a really long time about like how do I even though? Like because it feels like a skill that has not been instilled in a lot of us. I know I did not. I grew up understanding that family was important and that friendships were good, but community did not really factor into my upbringing. Like I don't remember that being a huge part of it. Now it is. And I also am still like getting those skills, like how to be in community where it's not about we see eye to eye on everything. We have a ton in common. But like you were talking about community, when you were describing it before, there being this sense of like it's not that we're necessarily besties, but like we have something in common. It's that thing in common could not be like a shared interest. It could be we all live in the same city, or we all recognize that even if there's a lot of difference here, we are in this together. Like that means something. And some of that like local quality is also found in the third, but there is a sense of Jupiter, I think, being able to tie people together because of that distance, that like fact that it's not personal is a good thing. Like it allows for connections that aren't about we like to do the same thing on a Saturday night. Like that's not what that has to look like. It can be for
Totally.
other reasons that feel larger than like hobby or interest or exact alignment. Like, wow, we are soulmates. Like we have
Mm-hmm.
everything, you know? Um, and at the same time, I think that community and friendship, which are different, though they can overlap, do bring up, despite it being Jupiter, despite the sextile, despite the like rising to the 10th house, like there are so many ways the 11th house sucks. Like it
Dude.
just hurts so bad. And I think it also hurts in the way that the benefic, like the joys of the benefics hurt, which is like, shouldn't this be good?
Yeah, it's the expectation, like that
Yeah.
Jupiter, like that same anticipation that we were talking about before, but taken in a different light, right? Of like, well, like I'm expecting that friendship should feel really good. And like, oh my God, it's painful, And I
Mm-hmm.
say this as someone who has a malefic ruled 11th house, my malefic contrary to sex. So the 11th house is a really like tender and oftentimes painful place for me. And I think when you're orienting around the Jupiter hope quality is, right? Like you're hoping that this thing is going to go well. You're hoping this friendship will work out and you're coming to it with good spirit, with
Mhm.
goodwill, that Jupiter kind of thing. And then getting those hopes and expectations dashed is almost like it's such a unique kind of pain as well, right? Because then you get into this whole thing like, well, should I even hope that it could be better or different?
Mhm.
And that can get you into a whole different kind of orientation to these things that ultimately on the surface we want to believe are good for us. And then, you know, they're not all the time for everybody. And that can be hard. And, we in our houses, too many projects and getting them conflated in my mind. And our finding fulfillment guidebook and workshop and stuff, we talk about like when the happy houses aren't happy,
Yeah.
and I think that there is this quality here of you think that on a baseline, the 11th is really happy. And that's because it is like it holds so much joy there. But that doesn't mean that you, in your chart, in your experience of that place, that it's going to feel happy. I think that's where things get sticky and hard and vulnerable, just like sharing a part of yourself or your work with the world is terrifying and exciting. And you have the hopes and expectations for what that project could be, what that might look like, how people might receive it, and then that can get dashed, right? So it's kind of this like tenuous relationship, even I think in charts where it's a nice situation. There's always
Yeah.
some level of really intimate kind of vulnerability that shows up there. And vulnerability is like really hard in the world that we live in that kind of tries to teach us to be really hard and hyper individualistic and all of these things. And it's like, well, if I'm a part of everything else, then I kind of can't exist without the 11th house. So what do I do about that? You know?
It's whether it's like share the vulnerability of sharing your work, the vulnerability of like pursuing friendship when like other people, I mean, speaking of like aspects to houses, there's a square to the eighth.
Mm-hmm.
So like the way that other people like are out of your control, but you still are entangled with them, like you don't get to pick how this
Yeah.
person reacts to you. You don't get to pick how they interpret you, for better or for worse. You don't get to pick if they project onto you, pedestal you, are jealous of you, competitive with you, um, like think you're so incredible that they don't actually see you like fully. Like there's so many ways this can go, and also like finding out all the stuff you're bringing to relationship, also not always fun.
No.
That mirror is that's a time,
Mirroring.
and
Yeah.
so it's mirror, the mirrors are mirroring, and so, and that shows up also in the way we show up to community. Are we showing up like entitled? Are we
Mm-hmm.
showing up like this should be easy? Are we showing up like passive? Are we showing up ready to roll up our sleeves and do whatever needs doing? Like, do we feel awkward? Probably. Like
Yeah.
the 11th is awkward as hell. Like there's a lot of I just have to sit in the discomfort of the fact I haven't done this before.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done it with these people, or I thought it would go this way and it didn't. Um, there's a lot of like needing to adjust in the 11th, which is why it's really good that there's like I think it's such like a Jupiter gift to be like, you know what, why don't we put hope in here? Because like we need it. It's very like we need each other, and yet um
Mm-hmm.
other people are hard. We're hard. So it's so messy.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to it's but like because astrology, it is messy differently for all of us.
Yes.
And it's really helpful to understand what your hopes and dreams actually are, because a lot of us don't want to look them square in the eye, because once you acknowledge them, what if I don't get them? Or am
Mm-hmm.
I allowed to want these things? Am I allowed to dream these things? So there's like a bunch of fear there. But then it's like, okay, now that I kind of know what I want to contribute and what my hopes and dreams are, where am I doing that? Like where and with whom? Who? I don't remember. Like you put forth these things, and it's also not just about like what I contribute, but how do I just show up and see what needs doing? Like it's all of that. And every step of the way is, no matter how benefic your 11th, is probably going to have some discomfort and awkwardness because,
Yeah.
again, as a place Jupiter loves, it's always stretching. It's
Mm-hmm.
always like,
Oh, you thought you got it figured out. Like, let's change it
yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit, let's push it further. It's making me think about Kurt Cobain, who has the moon and Jupiter in Cancer in the
Mm-hmm.
11th house, which pretty sweet deal. You've got a rejoicing, exalted Jupiter
One
and
would think.
Luna in domicile. And also, does he have still to this day, posthumously, a massive fan base who is obsessed with him, with his legacy, with his music, what he stood for, his message? Yes. Did he feel super great about having that level of audience all of the time? Absolutely not. Were part of his hopes and dreams to make an impact? Yeah. Did looking at that and knowing that and then getting that ultimately bring him joy and happiness? Not really. So it's one of those things too, where it's like you might have the most benefic situation possible in the 11th house, like he did, without a whole lot of things on the surface, unless you're really digging in to the way that trines are maybe not always as supportive as you might want them to be. Right on the surface, like he's got what, Mars in Scorpio, Saturn in Pisces. So it's all trines, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not like he has this like really intense overcoming square thing that's like mutilating this beautiful moon Jupiter situation. And still, it was hard because Jupiter was constantly growing it and the moon was constantly shifting it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you bring those two together, Jupiter exalts in Cancer, which means Jupiter likes change. Jupiter
Mm-hmm.
rules mutable signs,
Yeah.
by domicile. And so that part of the chart will take new form constantly. And I think because we are taught, especially your friendships, for example, should last a lifetime. And those are the friendships you should really aim for when it's like, well, maybe someone comes into your life for a season. What's that phrase? Like a season,
Mm-hmm.
a reason, or a
Mm-hmm.
lifetime. That's okay. Or maybe you have, a really big audience at one point and then it dwindles and you're not at that same height forever. Or maybe one project you put out does really well and the next one doesn't have the same level of interest or reception, right? Which I think any artist experiences
Mm-hmm.
at some level if you're prolific enough to put out multiple works of whatever it is
Totally.
that you're creating, right? And so, yeah, sometimes it's still going to feel hard, even when on the surface you're like, but look at that 11th house, look at that success.
Yeah. It's such a good example. And it makes me that that sense of like, okay, it looks good on the surface is why being like checkbox astrology is not going to get you there, like where you're just like,
Mhm.
well, benefic, exalted in its joy, sweet. You're like, okay, yeah, but what could this feel like?
Yeah.
Like, and what is the person likely to experience? And also, like, I like to take the perspective of the planet. Like, what does the moon feel like next to Jupiter there? Like, what is that? And also, we talk about this again in finding fulfillment. But my personal take is like, while having a malefic ruled 11th or a malefic in the 11th is really rough and sharp and difficult. Yeah, fifth. I there's a reason why we did this.
Yeah.
But I feel like having a luminary in the 11th is one of the rougher situations. No matter how dignified or whatever, when one of the main ways you understand yourself or with the moon feel like
Mm-hmm.
cared for and caring of others, when the way you understand your emotional landscape, the way that you like
Yep.
sense the emotional body, with the sun, you have like this sense of like, wait, who am I again? And like, how does this
Yeah.
work? And how am I going to be like visible in the world? And what do I want to show? And what do I want to hide? And when those topics are in the place of other people, that's that's like
A lot of
so
pressure.
much that's not in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard not to get wrapped up in how other people perceive you and
Yeah.
how your being experienced and read by others. And I think that that is a really, and it also makes this place of hope, which is like, do I get to hope? Is it okay? Is it vulnerable? Can I have these aspirations? And is that foolish? Like, what's the right amount?
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are a huge part of who luminaries in the 11th house people are. And so while the luminaries aren't benefic, malefic, there is pressure from that place, even though it's sextile to the first. Like that's a it just makes the variable that's not in your control a huge part of your understanding of yourself. And I think that that is really challenging for a lot of people, even if there are
Yeah.
gifts there as well, because it usually also means like at different times in their life, wow, my friends are really a huge part of who I am. And I'm so
Mm-hmm.
grateful. Or like, this is something that I feel I have, because it's so important to me, because a luminary or both are here. I have made this something that I'm skillful at, that I like know how to negotiate. But it doesn't mean it's easy all the time. And
Yeah.
rough transit to the luminaries are also a thing, and that's going to happen in your 11th. So like it's just yeah, I think that in addition to the malefics, I just wanted to shout out if when with Kurt Cobain, the moon's in domicile
Mm-hmm.
next to a benefic, so it seems really good, but I would imagine that that actually personally makes it too important.
Yeah,
Like
it's like this
it's
magnification thing
mhm,
happening there. And I think on that note of like the hope and the expectation, it's also like ambition, I think, as a
mhm.
topic lives in the 11th
Yes.
house. So it can create, if it's your son, like your self concept is also tied in with your ambition, which is tied in with your friendships and which is tied in with your community and your audiences. And that can create this warp around what is really real down here on the ground sometimes,
100%.
because part of that Jupiter delusion that we were talking about is like you do live in the clouds a little bit, and I think about someone like Kim Kardashian who has her son in the 11th house with Saturn and Pluto, and like how so much of her self concept is formulated and presentation as well around like what people want to see from her, what they expect her to look like or do, or how they want her to behave, right? And you can see the ways in which that's warped her
Hmm.
identity being in the public eye, right? And not always for the better, and sometimes that
No.
can be, I mean, if ever, you know,
I mean, listen, everybody's different, is what
listen,
I'll say.
exactly.
Yeah.
I always love a Kardashian chart, so it's hard for me not to
You're
to pull
you're
those out.
I always love when you do a Kardashian chart.
I'm a pop culture girly at heart, but yeah, it's hard to have that luminary there because I think you also then experience a lot of projection, right? Like your idea of who you
Totally.
are is also constantly being like questioned and challenged and like you were saying pedestaled sometimes, and like people think they know who you are because look,
The
you're right
parasocial shit
there.
is so intense.
Like you're right there in the 11th house, we can see you all the time, right? You're kind of on stage, and there's this thing where there's almost like this, I think this stage of the chart extends from the 10th into the 11th a little bit, and you are very visible in either parts of that, situation, whether you're in the 11th or in the 10th. And so when there's a luminary there, people feel like they know you, especially the moon. There's like this relatability versus when it's the sun, it's like an ideal, right?
Hmm.
It's like, oh, like I just want to be that person, where the moon is like, I feel like I am that person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I shrunk a little bit because I have a moon ruled 11th, and I was like, don't be so loud, Kira. Um, I think also like the moon thing reminds me is I know like therapy is a seventh house thing. It's like a one on, and then like a lot of the topics are eighth house,
Well,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, 12th for sure. Yes, I maybe by saying it's eighth house, I give myself away about the kind of topics I end up talking about when I am in therapy. But I feel like there is a thing that happens with people in certain like service professions where people are like, oh, I want to be my therapist's friend, or I want to be my hairstylist's friend, or like my favorite bartender's friend. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is like, I think a lunar projection of like, I am not acknowledging this person is actually doing a job.
Yeah.
And part of their job is to care. I mean, frankly, I want to be my astrologer's friend, like, is to like care for me in this structure of our time together. But that does not mean that I will that's not what a friendship would look
Right.
like with this person. It would look completely different. But it's like placing this lunar feeling of being like um the fantasy of being cared for, I think, in a very specific way, or being able to imagine yourself closer with someone than you
Yeah.
actually are, even if they're not in like a service profession where it's more like a celebrity or something, but having this moment of like that reflective light of the
Mm-hmm.
moon and being
Mm-hmm.
like, I see myself, I
In
feel
you.
seen,
Yeah.
I feel like you get me, and then so we should be close. And that kind of like very understandable, so common that like therapists actually train about when this happens to people, like that thing does happen a lot for, I think, not necessarily, I mean, it can be for like 11th house ruled by the moon, but especially moon in the 11th people.
Yeah, I mean the moon also symbolizes the public, right? So then there's like this relatability
Yep.
factor, this connection, this cohesion thing. When we bring it back to Jupiter as being a not personal planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times what you're finding in the 11th house is not always deeply personal, even if there is a facet of it that's really personal and vulnerable and intimate. There's it's I always say sometimes like it's more curated in a sense what we find in the 11th, and I know that
Mm-hmm.
some people really don't like that. I've had some pushback on that in the past, and I think people hear curation and they think fake. And I don't
Oh.
think that's true at all. Right. But when you're in the 11th house, when you're on stage, when you're with a big group of friends, right, you're not probably behaving the exact same way that you would in a one on one environment or with your best friends. There's there is a little bit of a curation at an astrology conference. You're probably not behaving the same way that you would with your partner on the couch watching Netflix. There's a
Mm-hmm.
different quality of intimacy there. And so, certain planets, when they're placed in the 11th, I think they can deal with people feeling like that relatability or getting confused with that, where they feel this impersonality towards the audience, the crowd, the other, people in the room kind of thing. And that warping, I think, can be difficult sometimes to deal with.
I think also like there's the distance, especially when we're talking about audience, so that you don't encourage the parasocial stuff.
Yeah.
But also, even in friend group or community, unlike the first house or even the 10th house, which is, I think, more individual
Mm-hmm.
oriented, you are getting the pleasure and challenge of being slotted into a larger mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really about you.
Yeah.
Like it's about the group. It's about like what part of it, like at an astrology conference, for example, because conferences are like a perfect 11th
11th
house.
house thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not there because you're all close. You're there because you share a profession.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's which is also different than community or a friend group, but these are all the different kind of versions of 11th house group dynamics. I think that um, there's a sense of like, well, I'm kind of on because I'm at my job in a way, even though it's
Yeah.
social and I'm whatever, but it's still like reputation oriented. Like you are still thinking of yourself as speaking with your colleagues and your teachers and your students and your clients potentially. Like it's different. Um, but I also think that there is a sense of in almost all the different versions of the 11th house, this sense of like, I am one of many.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's a different vibe than I'm thinking of myself as relating to, like, you can have a seventh house experience having a one on one conversation with a really close friend at a conference.
Totally.
But who you are just walking around
Mm-hmm.
is going to be like, this is, I think about, this feels like a very, there's no actual connection between Libra and the 11th for
I
this,
know what
but
you
like
mean, though.
but there is this kind of like, I'm just really aware of all the social data coming in at any given moment. And I am
Mm-hmm.
trying to find my place in it in order to create a sense of harmony and ease. And so I think that is a really different way of moving as an individual through space than
Yeah.
first house, seventh house, or 10th house type of work.
Totally. It's making me think of, when you're thinking about like a wedding. Like a wedding
Mhm.
is a very 11th house event, right? You're seated at a table with all these people that maybe you know and maybe you don't know. And it's not really about you, like you were saying, right? You're there for other people for this party, but you're also kind of on in that same way where you're like, but I'm a representative almost of
Mhm.
like my relationship with this other person. So you're not going to be like a total asshole to the other people that you're eating dinner with, right? You're going to kind of be a little bit more aware of how you're presenting at that time because you want social harmony and ease and you don't want to mess up the event. And there's, there's something where it kind of becomes impersonal again, where it's
Mhm.
like, okay, it's not about me here. And I think that, like you were saying, you might have seventh house or third house experiences, right? Like you dancing on the dance floor with your like three best friends and it feels like it's just you in the room, right? That's a very third house experience at this 11th house event, but you're still at the 11th house event and you're probably somewhere in the back of your mind keeping that keeping that front and center even when you're in that moment because that's the space that you're operating within. And yeah, I think that's also the Jupiter quality of goodwill and like you when you bring all these people together at this wedding, you're also trusting, another Jupiter keyword, another 11th house topic, that
Mhm.
people aren't going to misrepresent you, aren't going to cause a scene, aren't going to ruin the party. And same thing when you are getting together with people at an astrology conference or something like that, right? Like you're also all trusting that there's going to be a safe environment. Hopefully, people are masking, like we're taking care of each other, that there is this kind of community orientation because maybe it's not what you would do in your everyday, but it should be something that you're doing when you are considering a greater group. And Jupiter is a planet that
Like,
operates a little bit more from a considerate standpoint, I would say.
yeah, and I think different charts are going to be like, yeah, I am so aware of the people
Mm-hmm.
around me, and I am constantly like, I am on in times when other people would think that they could be off. Like, that's how
Totally.
I operate. And some people are like, no, that sounds phony. Like, I'm gonna speak up at the wedding table if someone says something shitty. Like, I'm okay throwing like a grenade into the conversation. Like, that's like my thing. Like, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that there's like a variability here. There's a spectrum of
totally.
how sort of buttoned up and kind of like surround system kind of awareness that someone might have versus being like, no, I feel like that's not authentic. And I think that we can debate what authenticity means, like, and what that can look
Oh, the
like for
cows come
people.
home. Yeah.
But I think that one of the things I notice with having malefics in the 11th is being the rabble rouser, like being the person who's going to be like, you know what, actually, fuck the idea of group harmony. I need to bring something up. And like, and it can actually improve the group to have the conflict, to have the fuss and the whereas one person might be like, hey, this isn't why are you making this isn't about this, what are you doing, this is selfish actually. And someone else is like, no, we're going to be closer at the end, or we're going to be more real with each other if we actually like have it out. And I think that's another like different kind of, which is like malefic energy, but it's not bad,
Yeah.
like it's
I mean, I was
and
laughing
so
because I felt attacked.
um I think that there is real value to throwing a wrench in the works in the 11th house for the sake of truth or protection, another like potentially Mars type of thing, for the
Yeah.
longevity of the group, a Saturn thing, to be like, you know what, we'll be friends longer if we actually talk about this shit.
Yeah,
Um,
generative conflict can be a
mm-hmm,
thing. And
mm-hmm,
even being willing to be the person, like you were saying, who says something that nobody wants to hear, but maybe it's going to make the night go better. If
mm-hmm,
someone tells off the asshole who won't stop harassing you,
mm-hmm.
me, I'll be the person.
Thanks,
And
Kara.
everyone's like, Kira, sit down. And I'm like,
Yeah,
listen, and I'll
yeah,
just go off because I'm not going to sit here for the next 2 hours while you're harassing me and my friends. I'll tell you to fuck off. And
yeah.
you know what? Like maybe that disturbs the harmony of the moment for like 5 minutes. But if that person then does actually leave us alone for the rest of the night, like we're better for it,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
even if they don't, you did what was true for you, and people
Yeah.
shouldn't harass other people. Like it's so, but I think your analogy overall, this is the thing. Baseline 11th
Yeah.
house, what you set up. And then we start layering in what people's specific
You
charts
got a
look like.
layer.
And then, well, yeah, but I also think it's really useful in astrology to know what the baseline sort of setup is, because if you just jump right into all the different possibilities, it can get really overwhelming. I think it's really useful to almost like set a scene and then start letting the planet characters come in and be like, how would they respond to this scene? And
Totally.
the wedding is a really good one. Even
Thanks.
though like
Yeah.
between the couple, it's like celebrating their seventh house
Their
thing.
seventh house thing.
A wedding is inherently about it's, I mean, it depends on the wedding and the time period we're talking about, but there is a kind of coming together of disparate groups from the couple's life. And like they don't, most of the time you don't know everyone at a wedding.
Yeah.
And
And if you're
you're there
electing,
under a banner
mm-hmm,
that is
mm-hmm.
not about you're all really close.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're electing for a, a marriage, it's such an interesting thing because you're not just electing for the marriage, you're also electing for the wedding. So you want like this really nice house 11th house situation because you're also electing for the party and you want that to go well. But you also want the seventh house to be really good because that's the marriage itself. And so there's this kind of interesting thing there,
Mm-hmm.
right? But yeah, I think that what you were saying about the baseline is really important because I think society also operates around the baselines. You know, like the baseline that friendship should be something supportive, the baseline of, all of these things. Like we tend to kind of judge our individual experiences off of that baseline, that
Totally.
astrology is like if it was an empty chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were no planets and there were no signs here, how would you talk about the 11th
Yeah.
house, which is most of what we've hopefully accomplished today, right? But then you do have to add in all of these different layers because that's how we get the unique, nuanced experience of every individual person that exists in the world, which is everyone has a different 11th house. And so you always have to kind of, which is both the blessing and curse of astrology, take it one step further, you
Yeah.
know? You can never really,
Totally.
everyone's like, should I add this in? Should I think about this? It's like
Yes.
almost always 99% of the time, the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I sometimes worry, like we talked about before, about like, why not both? Well, then does everything mean everything? And then it doesn't mean anything. But what you and I always talk about is like, well, when you start layering, what happens so often is the same story starts telling
Mm-hmm.
itself. Like
Mm-hmm.
you just keep, at first, it seems like contradictory things because life is complicated and it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And even though this, but also like that happens. But then at some point, if you keep layering, it just sort of stacks the
Yep.
same exact sandwich on top of it. And you're like, okay, so this is the same. Clearly, this is the sandwich, you know? Um,
Yeah. And maybe there's tomato and maybe there's lettuce. And I see that those are different ingredients here, but baseline, I'm getting a chicken club or whatever it
yeah,
is all the
yeah,
way down.
like totally, totally. And I think that um, to your point about like the baseline, I think that the scene is such an important, I talk about scenes a lot in astrology because it's
Yeah.
useful for me to imagine it like an environment where certain things are encouraged and there's a certain setup, but almost anything can happen. And like the wedding imagery for me is so perfect because while, we've listed all the ways the 11th house is a good house,
Mm-hmm.
but speaking of how the good houses can feel bad, if it's a group of people hanging out, what else can happen?
Yeah.
A lot. Like it's great because it's a group. It's great because we need each other. It's great because it's we can't actually go it alone.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a group, that means that loneliness is possible. Feeling like you're alone, even standing in a group of people. You can feel like you're the odd one out or you're being bullied or shamed. You can feel
Mm-hmm.
like you don't belong anymore, even though you used to belong inside this group of people. You can feel competition and jealousy and all the things we've talked about, but you also can feel supported, loved, cared for. You can feel pushed to grow your capacity to receive love and support.
Yeah.
You can be inspired. You can share your most vulnerable shit and have it be held and understood. Like it's all of it because it's baseline group dynamics and the hopes and dreams we share with each other. which can go all kinds of ways. But that's the baseline.
That was so beautiful that I feel like we actually have to end there because I don't think it's going to get better than that. And you don't know, Meg and I, we can talk
We
a,
really can.
a lot,
Yeah.
to an extensive degree, which, nobody really knows, but we might maybe be planning on potentially talking at length about something else at some point in the maybe not so distant future. But who
We
knows?
could, we might
We'll
have
see.
it like almost all done.
Yeah.
We'll see. You'll see.
We'll see. Stay
Hmm.
tuned for
Yeah.
things that may or may not be coming. But
Yeah. Who can say, really?
I mean, not me.
I
I
would
haven't.
never.
No. We can't do
No.
that. This is our Mercury coming out. Both of our mercurial sides are showing in all of their glory. But thank you so much for talking about the 11th house with me. I know we'd already talked about it quite a bit, which means that there was really nobody else that I wanted to talk about this with but you.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that I know I tend to promo anybody's stuff that comes on the show because I love genuinely everybody that has been on this show. But if you have not gotten a fifth or 11th house reading with Meg, I genuinely don't even have words to express how badly you need to do that. Like actually changed my life and changed my perspective of my chart and made things that are really, really hard for me feel more manageable and accessible. And you have such a way with connecting the technical sides of astrology with story and poeticism and meaning and magic. And you just make the chart come alive. And I'll stop because I know you're shrinking from
I'm
all of the
fine. You're
praise,
fine.
but I
I don't
really,
know why I didn't see this coming. I should have prepared myself more.
this is
Thank
my
you.
domicile Jupiter that
I
wants
know,
to
I know.
just, give
Hype.
all of my love
The
back
hype.
to.
Hype is also another really good Jupiter word.
Yeah. Hype is, yeah, promo,
Mhm.
11th house thing. So, on that note, we got to promote Meg's fifth and 11th house readings. We got to promote finding fulfillment. If you
We
liked
gotta.
this,
Oh boy.
do we have
We
something for
have so
you?
much for
We
you.
have so much for you.
We do.
What, 3.5 hour, 3 hour, 3.5 hour
I
workshop?
think it clocks in at about there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a guidebook, which we did something that we weren't planning on doing and then couldn't
Nope.
resist doing, which was a cookbook where we went through all of the rising signs and basically told you what your fifth and 11th house mean on a somewhat of a baseline, but a much more personalized one because we're
Oh, for
bringing
sure.
in that exact thing that Meg was talking about, where you're talking about the scene that is a little bit more specific because of the sign, because of the planets that rule it. And so if you want something, you're like, well, what about my 11th house? But you're not ready to jump straight into a reading or a
Hmm.
really long lecture. That guidebook is kind of like the perfect
Yeah.
introductory. Here, meet your fifth and 11th house. And,
Hmm.
how's this guidebook that I just put out? You want to know about all those aspects to the 11th that kind of change your understanding of it and make all of the keywords weave together in a really interesting way. That's out too. So, got lots of stuff for you to get through if you enjoy this
Yeah.
episode.
Truly. The houses guidebook is so good. And I think that so often the houses end up just like a list of keywords, which is nice, but not super useful. And you make it so much more alive than that. It's obvious to me not only how much you fucking love astrology by reading that, but also like what a good teacher you are. And also the fact that you are a working astrologer who sees clients, because it's so obvious that this is like a living and breathing thing for you instead of just like technical descriptors. Like it feels like something people can really use, which is not always true for astrology content, to be honest.
Wow. Thank you. And if you guys were wondering what Meg and I's like messages look like, it's just this back and forth a
Yep.
lot of the time. And
Really, this is
then
just a podcast of us doing our signal texts that we
yeah,
do most days, but just in this format instead.
and for you live instead.
Yeah.
So we hope you enjoyed it. Check out Meg's work. All of the links are going to be in the description below, so you can find all of the different things that we've talked about. And also, I'm definitely going to link to Meg's reading. They have an incredible Substack called The Gleaming Feast, so check that out as well. Their writing is absolutely phenomenal. And yeah, just glad that you guys tuned in for another episode. Stick around for another one coming to you next Tuesday. As always, we appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.